At the height of its power, Rome was more than an empire. It was a machine in constant motion, advancing as if history itself were a road paved by its legions. Each new province did not merely represent annexed lands, but rather an affirmation of the supremacy of its culture, its military discipline, and the idea that the world could only find order under the Roman eagle. From the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Germania, from the Hellenistic cities in the east to the villages of Gaul, the logic was always the same. Resisting Rome was useless, because sooner or later its legions would cross rivers, mountains, and borders to transform chaos into civilization. That power seemed endless. Rulers came and went, but the machine kept the same rhythm: calculated marches, roads cutting across continents, fortresses built in conquered territories, and a policy of absorption that turned enemies into allies. Rome was, in practice, the very synonym of invincibility. But even this giant that seemed to know no obstacles would encounter a point where the logic of expansion would be put to the test. As it conquered the West and established itself in Britannia, a new ambition arose: to go further, to reach the territory rising in the north, wrapped in mountains, dense forests, and eternal mists. It was Caledonia, what we now call Scotland, and it would be there that Rome would discover its power had limits. When Emperor Claudius landed in Britannia in 43 AD, it seemed like just another campaign destined to consolidate the glory of Rome. The territory, until then fragmented into rival tribes, quickly yielded before the irresistible combination of diplomacy and military power. Roads began to cut across the landscape, amphitheaters rose in growing cities, and the baths, symbols of the Roman way of life, became gathering places for local elites already co-opted by the empire. Within a few decades, the south of the island was breathing Rome, its customs, its laws, its architecture. It was inevitable, then, that the gaze of governors and generals would turn beyond the already pacified lands. To the north, Caledonia emerged as the next natural stage of expansion. The Roman view was pragmatic. If they had tamed Egypt, defeated the Parthians in strategic confrontations, and reduced Gaul to silence, what resistance could that cold, mountainous territory inhabited by peoples without writing or political centralization possibly offer? To the Senate and the emperors, it seemed like just another piece to be fitted into the vast imperial chessboard. However, the expectation of repeating in Caledonia the success achieved in southern Britain would reveal a fatal miscalculation. While Rome believed it was marching toward yet another inevitable victory, what the legionaries would encounter was an enemy unlike anything they had ever faced before, not just warriors, but an entire land that refused to be conquered. Caledonia was not just a territory to be occupied. It was a silent enemy, shaped by nature itself. For the Romans, accustomed to advancing along straight roads and open fields, every step northward was a battle against the very landscape. Mountains rose like natural walls. Narrow valleys funneled armies into inevitable ambushes, and treacherous swamps swallowed men, horses, and supplies without warning. The forests, dense and shadowy, blocked the sunlight, turning each march into a plunge into darkness, where any tree could conceal an enemy. And it was not only the terrain that wore down the discipline of the legions. The climate, described by chroniclers and confirmed by modern studies, was even harsher than it is today. Relentless rains turned camps into muddy swamps. The humidity corroded armor, rotted provisions, and spread disease. The fog, sudden and thick, reduced visibility to just a few meters, isolating groups of soldiers and creating a constant sense of vulnerability. The biting cold, coupled with short summers and long winters, weakened bodies and eroded morale. Each legionary marched carrying not only the weight of his equipment, but also the weight of uncertainty. The road ahead might lead to safety or to an unseen precipice. Each night, rest was broken by the dread of unexpected attacks. The geography and climate of Caledonia were not temporary obstacles. They were permanent forces that seemed to work together to protect that land from any invader. It was in this hostile setting that the Picts, the local inhabitants, learned to turn nature itself into a weapon. They did not need to face Rome in open battle. It was enough to let the terrain and the climate do half the work for them. The Romans called them Picti, the painted ones, because their skins, marked with blue lines and tribal symbols, were the only visible identity of a people without writing, without monumental cities, and without kings who could serve as targets. To the imperial eye, this absence of central organization was a sign of weakness. But in practice, it was exactly the opposite. There was no single heart to strike, no capital to sack, no ruler to corrupt or co-opt. These scattered tribes survived in small circular stone settlements, built on elevated ground from which they could see every valley, every lake, every possible entrance. There, they lived in harmony with the land that Rome called savage, but which for them was protection. They moved along invisible trails, dominated rivers with light and silent boats, and vanished into the forest, as if they were part of it. More than soldiers, they were hunters of opportunity, ambushing patrols, striking supply lines, and disappearing before a legion could organize itself. What unsettled Rome most, however, was not their weapons, but their mindset. While many conquered peoples accepted Roman citizenship in exchange for privileges and prosperity, the Picts rejected any approach. They did not want roads, they did not want to wear Roman tunics, they did not want to learn Latin. The refusal to submit was, in itself, a form of combat. As Tacitus wrote when describing Caledonian resistance, they are more prepared for war than for submission. This phrase was not just a description, it was a warning that, against them, Rome faced not only warriors, but a people united by the conviction that living free was worth more than surviving under the imperial mantle. Thus, while Rome relied on the predictability of its legions, the Picts imposed the unpredictable. They did not appear in open fields, did not fight at the appointed hour, did not play by the rules of military discipline. Their war was one of ambushes, night raids on camps, patrols that vanished into the mist. It was a war to wear the enemy down, to turn every advance into attrition, every victory into illusion. Rome was famous for turning war into a science. Its legions advanced like the gears of a perfect machine. Roads open to ensure supply, symmetrical camps built at the end of each march, disciplined formations in open field. This predictability had crushed Gaul, subdued Judea, and contained Germania. Yet in Caledonia, every gear of the machine jammed. When they tried to apply terror, burning villages, destroying crops, taking hostages, they found only silence. There were no walled cities to burn, no granaries sustaining an entire population. The Picts lived by hunting, fishing, and in mobile communities that could disappear within hours. Rome's power to subdue through hunger simply did not work. Large battles, where legionary discipline shone brightest, were also rare. The famous Battle of Mons Graupius, reported by Tacitus, makes this clear. Even in the face of a Roman victory, with thousands of Caledonians killed, the outcome was hollow. There was no defeated king to sign surrender, no captured capital to serve as a trophy. Days later, the same warriors who had escaped reappeared on another hill, in another ambush, as if nothing had happened. It was like fighting against the mist itself. Rome also tried to impose a lasting presence, fortresses, roads, fortified camps. But almost all met the same fate, abandonment. The cost of maintaining garrisons in an environment of constant attacks was unsustainable, and the logistics of sending supplies ever farther north became a nightmare. Every step forward seemed to require twice the men and resources, and still nothing endured. Rome's greatest weapon had always been its ability to absorb enemies, turning tribal chiefs into allies, granting citizenship to local elites, creating Romans outside Rome. In Caledonia, this power lost its effect because the Picts did not want privileges, saw no advantage in trading their freedom for roads and public baths. They resisted not only with spears, but with indifference to what Rome had to offer. And it was in this deadlock that the grandest and most revealing solutions arose, the walls that would mark the limits of expansion. The decision to raise walls was, for Rome, both practical and symbolic. When Emperor Hadrian arrived in Britannia in 122 AD, he brought with him a vision different from that of his predecessors. Instead of advancing indefinitely, it was time to consolidate. Thus was born Hadrian's Wall, a colossal structure stretching for more than 117 kilometers, from the Irish Sea to the North Sea. Built in stone, reinforced with towers, control gates, and garrisons, it was not just a physical barrier. It was a confession of limits. For the first time, Rome acknowledged that there was a frontier not worth crossing. But imperial ambition did not quiet easily. A few decades later, under the command of Antoninus Pius, the frontier advanced once more. A new barrier was built farther north, the Antonine Wall, made of pressed turf on a stone foundation. Unlike the robustness of Hadrian's Wall, this new line was more vulnerable, but it represented a political effort to show that Rome was still expanding its dominion. However, in less than 20 years, it was abandoned. The constant pressure of the Picts, logistical difficulties, and unsustainable costs forced the legions to retreat once again to Hadrian's line. The alternation between advance and retreat revealed an uncomfortable pattern. The empire that once seemed invincible now had to admit that certain lands could not be conquered. Rome, which prided itself on turning frontiers into roads, now found itself forced to erect stone barriers to contain invisible enemies. Caledonia had ceased to be just a territory to conquer, and had become a permanent reminder that even the greatest empire had an endpoint. Yet the story did not end there. A century later, an emperor determined to prove otherwise would personally march north, leading one of the largest military forces ever assembled on the island. At the beginning of the 3rd century, unrest in the north still persisted. The Picts, far from being silenced by the walls, continued to cross the frontier, attack outposts, burn villages, and humiliate the Romans on their own defensive line. It was in this scenario that Emperor Septimius Severus, already old and ill, decided to take upon himself the mission of ending Caledonian resistance once and for all. In 208 AD, he landed in Britannia accompanied by his 2 sons, Caracalla and Geta, and mobilized around 50,000 soldiers, a gigantic number for the hostile geography of Scotland. Severus' strategy was simple and brutal: scorched earth. The legions advanced like a wave of destruction, burning settlements, cutting down forests, devastating crops, and forcing the Picts to retreat into the highlands. Dio Cassius recorded that the emperor is said to have ordered, "Subdue the entire land, kill all who resist." Yet even in the face of such extreme violence, the outcome was frustrating. Nature once again proved to be an ally of the Caledonians. Endless marches through cold and rain, roads turning into quagmires, soldiers struck down not by swords, but by fevers, infections, and exhaustion. While the Romans wore themselves down, the Picts vanished into the mist, only to return days later with swift and devastating attacks. No victory was definitive, no massacre guaranteed peace. It was like fighting an enemy made of shadow and patience. Severus himself, weakened by age and illness, did not survive the campaign. In 211 AD, he died in Eboracum, modern-day York, without ever having conquered Caledonia. His sons, divided by rivalries, soon abandoned the north and retreated south, thus bringing to an end Rome's last great attempt to dominate all of Scotland. There was no celebration, no triumph. Only silence remained, the uncomfortable silence of a defeat that could not be told as glory. Caledonia became more than just an unconquered land. It turned into a symbol etched into the memory of the empire. South of the walls, Rome left mosaics, roads, amphitheaters, and cities that still today bear witness to its presence. To the north, there remained only abandoned traces, unfinished forts, and trails erased by the rain. That absence was eloquent. It showed that, despite all its power, Rome had found an insurmountable limit. For the Caledonians, and later for the peoples who inherited their legacy, such as the medieval Scots, this resistance became a source of pride. They had not only faced soldiers, they had defeated the very idea of Rome as an inevitable force. The fact that the empire had raised walls not to protect conquests, but to defend itself from an unconquerable land spoke louder than any victory. And for the empire itself, the lesson was bitter. From Caledonia onward, Rome ceased to be merely a power in expansion and became a power that needed to protect its borders. It was the beginning of a shift in mentality, the recognition that there was no infinite glory, that not all peoples could be absorbed, and that there were places where legionary discipline was useless against the resilience of invisible warriors. Thus, Scotland, or Caledonia, as the Romans called it, came to be remembered as the land that Rome never conquered. Not because there was a lack of soldiers, nor a lack of courage, but because their nature, culture, and the refusal to submit formed an unbreakable barrier. It was the point on the map where the greatest empire of antiquity had to admit, this far and no further. If this story kept you engaged until now, it's because within you lies the same curiosity that once moved empires, and the same desire to understand how far humanity can go. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Rome could have defeated Scotland if it had tried harder, or was defeat inevitable from the beginning? Leave your opinion in the comments. Your perspective may open a new debate and bring up points no one has noticed. If this video made you reflect, give it a like now, because that shows YouTube this content deserves to reach more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories of battles, empires, and civilizations that shaped the destiny of the world. Share this video with that friend who loves history. Together you can discuss whether Rome's power really had limits. See you in the next video.